Hey Internet, Mike Byrne, aka Magic Man, here again, and welcome to part 2 of our How to Play Final Fantasy Trading Card Game, or FFTCG video series. If you're coming straight from part 1, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun starting to get these updated from the series we did a handful or so years ago, and I'm kind of excited about today. So in video 1, if you haven't watched it, check out the playlist here on Ready Check Radio. And of course, while you're there, hit that like and subscribe button and all that fun stuff. You know how to feed the algorithm. I don't need to tell you how to do that. But we covered card anatomy and the composition of your 50-card standard deck. And while we mentioned the limit break deck as a new mechanic as part of constructing your deck, we didn't exclusively cover it because I want to cover it by itself here at the beginning of this video. So you're almost ready to play. You've got your deck, you know how the cards work, but now it's time to get into a couple of things that have actually changed in the 6 years between the original series I made and this one, and that's going to include not just the limit break deck, but also multi-element cards as we cover the limit break deck, paying CP or crystal points and spending crystal points to cast and play cards, and we cover the actual phases of your turn. That's all that we're going to cover today, and then in the next video, we'll set up a game board, and we'll talk about playing in those phases that we kind of review the outline for today. So excited to talk about some new things. Other things, by the way, if you're a longtime player and you're thinking, okay, where's warp, and where's priming, and where's damage, and where's counters, and all that fun stuff, they're going to get their own video for keywords and mechanics, because you kind of have to just know how to play the game first, and then those mechanics are just kind of tacked on to other pieces of the game. So I think that makes sense in their own video, and I hope you do too. But 2 new things that we'll be covering today that weren't in the original videos. Let's get started. Okay, so let's start with limit break deck. Now, I had mentioned in the first video that to build a standard format deck, you needed 50 cards, no more than 3 copies of any given particular ID. They could be any elements you wanted, including light and dark, which we'll get into a little more here on some of the special rules for that when we talk about actually paying and spending crystal points for cards. I think it makes more sense there than jamming it in the last video for somebody that might reference individual videos later. But we did not cover what you needed to do to build that limit break deck. We just kind of mentioned that it was a side deck, not a sideboard, of 8 cards. But what is that? Well, introduced a few sets ago, we have had limit break cards. And if you're looking here at Mr. Red 13, you'll see that the card itself looks almost identical to forwards, backups, summons, and monsters that I showed you in the first video. There's a cost in the upper left-hand corner with the element indicated by the color of the crystal and the icon behind the text. It's a forward, a warrior, category 7. We see the power, all that fun stuff, the ability text. But we also see 2 new pieces of information. One is an icon in the upper right. Now, in video 1, we covered the multiplay icon and the X-Burst icon, but this is a third icon that can now be on cards, and it's that LB and kind of fleur-de-lis border-ish thing in the upper right-hand corner there. We also see in the text box that there is a first line of text that says limit break, dash, and then a number. So this mechanic is exclusive to these cards. You cannot put cards that don't have the LB counter icon in your limit break deck. So your limit break deck of 8 cards, could be less, but just make 8. You'd be hamstringing yourself if not. All have to be comprised of these specific limit break cards. Now, that's not always the case in other formats. There are special rules for sealed and draft where you might not just happen to draft enough limit break cards to make an 8-card deck, and you can jam regular cards in there just to use as fodder to pay for the other limit break cards. But standard format is our focus here, so we're going to build a deck of 8 of these limit break cards. And they could be any ones you want, no problem, but it follows the same rule as your standard deck. You can't have more than 3 copies of, say, Red 13 in here. And if you wanted to, you could put 3 Red 13s, you could put 3 Emperors, and then you could put 2 Graph if you wanted to. And that would be an 8-card limit break deck. Now, just like your forwards and your cards from your standard deck, you can only play these cards when they're legal to do so. So I know we haven't gotten to phases and legality of what you can do and when yet, but you can only play forwards during your main phase 1 and main phase 2 in the game. So if you have a forward in your limit break deck, it could only be played during your main phase 1 or your main phase 2 in the game, just like something from your hand. The difference is these cards are available to you from the start of the game. You could, if you wanted to, play Graph from your limit break deck on turn 1. Probably not ideal for those of you that are savvy enough and have already taken a look at the text there, but you could. There's nothing stopping you. And in fact, there are some limit break cards that maybe benefit from being played as early as possible, up to and including turn 1. Everything about paying and spending paying for these cards is the same as other standard cards, but there's one exception. Graph here needs 3 CP, 3 crystal points, one of which is water. We covered that in video 1. But that limit break 2 is a special kind of cost associated with putting a limit break card on the field. Your limit break deck is private to you. It is face down. Again, more on private and public zones later when we get to actual gameplay and play mats, but it is a private zone. Your opponent cannot see it. However, when you want to play Graph, you have to remove Graph from your limit break deck, pay your 3 CP, one of which is water, put Graph on the field, and then you also have to reveal or turn face up 2 additional limit break cards, hence limit break 2. If it was limit break 1, you would reveal 1 additional limit break card. That revealed limit break card can now no longer be played. Your face-up limit break cards cannot be played. So it is a finite resource, a very finite resource, but it is available to you from the very beginning of the game. And there is one little special caveat on limit break cards when they leave the field. Regardless of how they leave the field, they do not end up in the zone that they go to. For instance, if Graph was blocked by a 9,000 power forward and they traded damage and Graph died, Graph would immediately go to the break zone, just like another regular standard deck forward that had died. But Graph then immediately gets removed from the break zone and put into your face-up limit breaks. You can't use this Graph anymore. It's not something you can recover from your break zone. It hits the zone and then goes back to the face-up limit break deck. Same as if Graph was bounced back to your hand by some summon of your opponents. The card returns to your hand and then immediately is put face-up in your limit break pile face-up. So you only get this use once. Graph would be gone. So would the 2 cards from the limit break deck that you use to pay Graph's limit break 2 card. And when you can't cast any more of them because you don't have enough limit break cards to reveal as part of the text box cost there, then you're out of limit break cards. But that literally breaks down your entire deck. You go ahead and you create your 50-card standard deck. You go ahead and you create your 8-card limit break deck. And away you go. You are now ready to start learning how to actually play these damn cards. So I think it's time for us to move on to how we generate the CP and how we spend the CP, crystal points, that we mentioned in the first video when we reviewed the anatomy of a card. So let's get to it. All right, so we've got our cards, we've got our standard deck, we've got our limit break deck, and now we actually just need to figure out how to play cards. Well, we're going to jump ahead a little bit, and we're going to pretend that we have our 5-card hand ready to begin a game. And again, we'll talk about mulligans and things like that when we hit video 3 and 4, where we kind of talk about the gameplay and the stack once we've gone through the phases in this game. But we'll assume we have a 5-card hand, and because we're going first, we draw 1 for turn instead of 2. So we're now looking at 6 cards in our hand, and one of which is our black belt here. And we've maybe got a little bit of experience with the game and our particular deck, so we know that getting some backups out as early as possible is going to be a good thing for us. So how do we get this black belt out onto the field? How do we pay the 3 CP, one of which has to be Earth, to get this black belt on the field? And yeah, maybe because we're going first, the ability text really isn't going to be all that beneficial, but it's a priority for us. We want to get this black belt. It's the only backup we have in our hand, and we want to get it out onto the field. How do we do that? How do we earn CP, and then how do we spend CP? Well, there's 2 primary methods, and this is where Final Fantasy TCG starts to differ from some other TCGs that you may have played, and it kind of borrows from some other ones as well, maybe some smaller ones. Unlike games like Magic the Gathering, where you just kind of get a land and slap that down once per turn, throw down a mountain, throw down a swamp or whatever, we don't really have resources like that. Our cards in our hand are our resources. We actually get to make the decisions on, I'm going to give up this card for now, maybe, and use it to play another card. So where you could be mana flooded or screwed in other games, that's not likely to happen here. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be resource pinched. A bad draw with no backups kind of might hurt your resource generation in subsequent turns. That can certainly still happen. But you will always have, unless your deck is really weirdly built and you have a really, really terrible mulligan, you will always have some option to play something, because the cards in your hand start as your resources. Any card in your hand can be discarded to your break zone to generate 2 crystal points of the color element that the card was. So if, for instance, I didn't want to play black belt, I just wanted to use it as resource, I could literally discard into my break zone that black belt on your screen, and I would now have 2 Earth crystal points to spend. 2 because I discarded a card. Doesn't matter how much the card is to play itself, it's always 2. And Earth because black belt is Earth. And now I can play anything from my hand that is 2 crystal points and Earth. Small exception, I could still play something that costs 1, because I discarded a card and generated 2 crystal points. I could play a 1-cost Earth backup by paying with the black belt, but I don't get to keep that extra 1 CP. It's just gone. Everything in Final Fantasy is pay and immediately spend, and if there's anything left over, it's to the ether. You don't get to use it. I could not play 2 1-costs. I have to play a 1-cost or a 2-cost, and it would be Earth in this case because I've discarded a black belt, generating 2 Earth CP. So every card in your hand is potentially a resource. Now, let's go back. I mentioned light and dark cards in video 1. Light and dark cards are a special elemental exception in Final Fantasy. You cannot discard light or dark cards to earn CP of any type. You can't. They don't generate anything. You can't discard them for that reason. They also don't require their own color to be played, right? That kind of makes sense. If I can't discard a light card for light CP, I can't then also be required to pay light CP to play a light forward or a dark forward. So, yes. And unless card text specifies otherwise, you can only have 1 light character, forward, backup, or monster, all 3 are characters, on the board at a time. 1 light or 1 dark. No multiple lights, no multiple darks, no one of each. Again, unless card text specifies otherwise and breaks those limits for you. So we can kind of, knowing that, separate light and dark out. And just look at fire, ice, wind, earth, lightning, and water for the rest of these CP generation examples. Now notice we were able to discard black belt for 2 CP, but only cast something that costs 1 CP. And yeah, we lose that other extra CP. It disappears. There is no carryover or anything. But we can do that. You are allowed to overpay for cards in Final Fantasy by discarding. But you can only overpay by 1 CP per element. So I could not discard 2 black belts. Now I have 4 Earth CP, and then play a 1 or a 2 cost. I have to play a 3 or a 4 cost. So you can only overpay by 1 per element that's required. Now, how do I get the black belt on the field? Let's do that. Well, I could discard 2 cards from my hand on my opening turn, and as long as one of those is earth, and none of them are light or dark, can't discard those. As long as one of those is earth, I will have 2 earth CP and 2 of some other CP. Maybe it's a fire card, right? I ditch a fire card and an earth card. I have 4 CP, 2 of which is earth. That meets my 1 being earth requirement for black belt, and I can put black belt on the field. I lose that 1 extra CP, but hey, them's the breaks sometimes. Them's the breaks. And now my black belt is on the field. All backups enter the field dull, and you'll see why in just a moment. All forwards enter the field active, upright. All monsters enter the field upright as well, unless card text specifies differently or the state of your game specifies differently. So backups, always dull. Well, that's pretty easy, Mike. I hear you saying, cool, I discard cards and I use them to pay for other cards, but that's weird. Why would I have odd-costed cards here then? It seems like I'm always going to be either paying on the nose if it's an even-costed card, or I'm always overspending by 1 if it's an odd-costed card. Well, there's a second way to generate crystal points. Remember, I said that backups always enter the field dull or tapped if you play other trading card games. Well, we are going to have an active phase where that black belt is going to stand up again. Okay? Now that he's on our field, we paid 2 cards and we played him. He came in dull. Our next turn, we got the black belt up. It's active. Our backups can actually be used to generate CP too. Now, they may have some action ability, so maybe I want to use them as CP. Maybe I want to use the action ability if it requires dulling the backup. So I'm going to have to make decisions here. But by dulling a backup, you generate 1 CP of that backup's element. So in this case, I can dull backup to generate 1 earth CP. And now you can start to see how I can combine that, right? I can discard a fire card, generating 2 fire CP, dull my black belt here for 1 earth CP. Now I've hit 3 CP on the nose. 2 are fire, 1 is earth. So I can play a 3-cost fire or earth card in this case. And yeah. Now you start to see how those odd-costed cards get out there. And as you see, as you start to build up backups, discarding cards to pay might be something you do with less frequency. You try to hold on to your hand resources and use your backups. This does have a limit. You can only ever have up to 5 backups in play at a time. And you can't just decide to pick up a backup, get rid of it because you want to play a different one. This black belt, because it has no ability that involves maybe dulling itself and putting itself in the break zone as cost, I can't break this. I can't just pick it up and say, I don't want this one anymore because I want to play a different one, and I'm already at 5. No. You have to break it with summons or other abilities, or your opponent breaks it or returns it to your hand. Those would be the types of things that could help you clear backups. And some backups do break themselves as part of cost for different abilities. You might dull a backup and put it in the break zone to make your opponent discard a card, in which case you've just freed up a backup slot. Great. Black belt, unfortunately, has no such ability. So I'm stuck with this black belt until we do something, me or my opponent, to get it off the field. And if I've hit 5 backups, I can't play any more backups. Forwards and monsters have no such rule. They are unlimited play. You can have 15 forwards out if you want to, and if you do, your opponent's probably pretty scared, unless they have a board clear in your hand, in which case you probably just lost the game. But a different topic for a different video. Forwards, monsters, and summons all play by these same rules. If you want to cast a 4-cost Earth summon, like the Ifrit we looked at in part 1 of this video, I could discard 2 cards from my hand, one of which was fire, and I meet the 4 CP, one of which is fire requirement to cast Ifrit, and I cast away. Playing forwards, the same way. Playing limit break cards, the same way. Now, I always have to figure out what's going to be the best for my entire turn, mapping out how I want to pay, what I want to discard versus what I would want to dull with backups. So there's a lot of strategy that comes into how you pay, particularly if you plan to take multiple actions per turn. But these are your two methods of producing CP to spend. Discarding cards from hands generates 2 for the element of the card you discarded, and dulling a backup produces 1 for the element that the backup is. Unless, of course, card text changes those rules, in which case, follow the card text. Always, always, always follow your card text. But! I explain all of that, and then I'm going to hit them with the but. But there's kind of a special exception that didn't exist back in the day of these original videos, and that is multi-element cards. They weren't a thing back then. So we do have to talk a little bit about how to pay for and how to use these cards to generate CP, because the rules work a little differently. Remember, when we were looking at cards like Cloud or Red 13 or whomever, we had to pay the cost, and one of those CPs had to be an element. So 4 CP, one of which has to be fire, right? Or 5 CP for Cloud, one of which has to be fire. But what about Zidane here, who is both fire and wind and costs 2 CP? Well, that's pretty easy if you think about it and you've got the right backups out, right? You probably are thinking, well, I have to dull a fire backup and I have to dull a wind backup, and I can play Zidane. That meets the requirements. 2 CP, and in this case, 1 was fire and 1 was wind, because Zidane is multi-element. You have to meet both requirements. Yes, dulling a fire backup and dulling a wind backup would be a totally legal way to play Zidane. But you can also discard and overpay to play Zidane. Now, I had mentioned earlier that you could only discard and overpay by 1 per element. And if you weren't thinking ahead to multi-element, you probably said, why is he saying per element? This is why. I have a couple different options if, let's say, I only have 1 backup available to me. Let's say I have a fire backup on the field. I can dull that for 1 fire CP to meet Zidane's fire requirement. But then I could also discard a wind card. Now, I've paid 3 CP total. 1 is fire and 2 are wind, so I do have at least 1 wind and 1 fire to play Zidane. Now I can play him. I'm going to lose that second wind CP. That I don't get to float it to anything else, so I've overpaid by 1. That probably makes sense in the way we were talking about Black Belt. But there is a third way to play Zidane, and it's why I worded things carefully earlier, saying per element. On a totally naked board, if I wanted to, and it doesn't have to be naked, but I do have the option at any time of actually discarding 2 cards from hand to play Zidane. And I know earlier when we talked about other cards, that wasn't an option. You couldn't discard 2 cards and play a 2 cost. It had to be 3 or 4. But the key here is that per element part. I can discard a fire card and a wind card into my break zone. I've generated 4 CP, 2 fire and 2 wind. That is 1 extra CP per element. That's why I'm allowed to do that to play Zidane. So I can discard a fire card and a wind card to play Zidane. I've overpaid by 2, but maybe I had to. Maybe I didn't have any wind or fire backups on board. Maybe I didn't have any wind or fire backups that I wanted to dull for paying for Zidane because of a strategic reason later. The reason doesn't matter. I always have the option of overpaying by 1 per element. So with cards that are multi-element, like Zidane here, you actually have 3 ways to pay, right? I could dull 2 backups of the correct colors, I could dull 1 backup and discard a card, or I could discard 2 cards, 1 of each of the elements needed for Zidane. If we take a look at another multi-element forward, Une here, we see the same thing, except it's earth and water in this case, and it's a lot more expensive. It's 6 CP. We're going to ignore the ability text here that can actually make this card cheaper for a minute. We're just going to focus on it costing 6. and pretend we can't make it cheaper for some reason. In this case, I can discard 3 cards, 2, 4, 6, 1 earth, 1 water, and 1 fire, right? As long as I have that 1 earth CP and that 1 water CP, I don't care what the rest of the color splash is. I get to pick what I want to discard there. As long as I meet the 6 CP, 1 of which is earth, 1 of which is water, Une hits the field. I could dull 4 backups, all of them earth, and discard a water card for 2 water CP. That meets 1 earth, 1 water, and 6 total CP. That's a legal play. So you have the options here. But I do want to point one thing out. While everything in your hand that isn't light or dark can discard for CP of its color, Une and Zidane, for example, what happens if I try to use them to pay for something? What if I want to discard them to generate CP? Do I get 1 earth and 1 water because I discarded Une? No. You get 2 CP still, but you need to pick the element. It's either 2 earth or 2 water. On the Zidane front, we are talking either 2 fire CP generated or 2 wind CP generated. So you don't get to split it. You got to pick one element either way. So no cheating on that one. You can't discard a Zidane and say 1 is fire, 1 is wind, and then play another Zidane. Doesn't work that way. You gotta decide which color you want to discard them for. So very exciting to actually talk about Limit Break and multi-element cards, as they were something I didn't get to talk about in the original series of these videos, and obviously have made a huge impact on the game. I know that's a lot, so I'm going to let that all percolate. If you have questions, obviously, feel free to throw them in the comments below. Of course, make sure you're coming by on ReadyCheckRadio.com. All the podcasts and all the socials are linked there. If you just go to the site, it's in the info. But hit us up on Twitch. We do live local gameplay here at my local store every Monday night, East Coast time. So you can always stop by there and ask questions live while you're watching games. But before we leave you, I do want to go over one last thing that's going to set us up for part 3, which might be a few days from now. I'm in a theater show right now that I have performances this weekend, so I don't know if I'm going to get to it until like Monday or Tuesday. Forgive me. I'm sorry. I love you. Let's talk about the phases of your turn. All right, let's finish up here today looking at the phases of a typical turn in FFTCG. We now know how to read cards, we know how to pay for cards, we know how to generate CP, we know how to construct our 50-card deck, we know how to construct our 8-card limit break deck, and we know how to play those limit break cards. We're almost ready to play. So next video, we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about the layout of your playmat and where generally things go for most games. And they're not set in stone. There's no like official rules on put your deck here and your break zone here. But the playmat that comes with the starter decks gives you the idea, and we'll go over that. It's the pretty typical format. Most players play that way. But if somebody moves something around a little bit, they're not generally going to get in trouble for that unless it's obstructing the board state or anything like that. And then we're going to start talking about turns and priority and the stack. And again, this is not a competitive play, in-depth judges ruling type video series. This is to get you started at your kitchen table. Be confident headed to your locals that you at least know the basic ideas of playing so that you're not starting from scratch. And to do that, I just want to review the phases of your turn briefly to kind of set us up for the next video. It's actually very simple. It's similar to other TCGs, with the exception of there's only a couple phases where players actually can do anything here. I know in other TCGs, particularly from my Magic the Gathering days, that there are plenty of times for your opponent to interact with you during almost every phase of your turn. That's not the case here. In Final Fantasy TCG, you have your active phase. Obviously, this is going to be very familiar to everybody that has played something like Magic the Gathering. Everything goes active. If everything was dull, as long as there's nothing prohibiting it from activating this turn, it'll go from dull to active, sideways to upright. Then we have our draw phase. The turn player going first in the game from a die roll or whatever is going to draw 1 card in this phase, and then subsequently after that, everybody's going to draw 2. You actually get to draw 2 cards per turn. It's just that first player's turn They have the advantage of going first, so they get the disadvantage of only drawing one card. Those two phases have no interactivity, so you don't have to remember any special rules or be ready for anything. See? 2 phases down, and nothing can happen to you. Activate your cards, draw your card or cards, depending on whether you went first or whether it's anything besides the first turn of the game. Then we have our main phase 1. This is our phase where we can play characters. Remember, a character is a forward, a backup, or a monster. And we could be playing them from our hand. We could be playing them from our limit break deck. Doesn't matter. As long as we can meet the cost requirements, we go ahead and do it. We can cast summons if we want to. Maybe not ideal in the first turn of the game, but you could if you wanted to. And for subsequent main phase 1s, you can cast summons. Either player. Summons are treated as instant speed. Now, we're going to get into the stack and priority, and when you can do that as the person that is not the turn player, when you get a chance to do things, since the turn player has what we call priority and they get to act first. We'll get into the specifics of that. I just want you to know that those summons in your hand, if it's not your turn, they could still potentially be live on your opponent's turn. And then we could also use abilities. If we have cards on the field that have abilities, we could spend a few crystal points and, give something haste so that it can attack the turn it comes in. We can pop those abilities here in main phase 1. Attack phase, pretty self-explanatory, right? This is where we're going to declare our attacks, and our opponent's going to decide whether or not they want to block. You are always attacking the other player. The player is the one that determines if they're going to throw a forward in front of it for a block. More on that in our attack phase video. And then main phase 2 is the exact same thing as main phase 1. So we can play more characters, we can cast summons, we can use abilities, all that fun stuff. That abilities and summons, by the way, those could also be done during attack phase in most cases. Again, more on that when we're actually playing. But yeah, literally we have 3 phases here where you could be interacted with, but 2 of them are the exact same thing. Really, the only difference is that you can't play characters in the attack phase. There's an exception when we get to keywords. We'll get to that in the keywords video. The exception's back attack, for those of you that are curious. Those are treated kind of like a summon. And then we have our end phase, which is kind of where we wrap up anything that takes place at the end of turn. Those types of automatic abilities or auto abilities would trigger. And this is yet another phase where there is no interaction. Yes, some end of turn phases may trigger other auto abilities, and yes, you do resolve those, but neither player can be casting summons on top of these things. So we have a total of 6 phases, 3 of which cannot be interacted with in any real way. Active, draw, and end phase. That's it. You do exactly what those things say. It's main phase 1, attack phase, and main phase 2, which is the exact same as main phase 1, that the interactivity happens. And no, you cannot cast characters in attack phase unless they have back attack. We'll cover that later. That's going to do it for part 2, gang. Part 3, again, going to be a couple of days before I can get to that one. Just my schedule's a little beating me up, but I promise you I'm trying to get these out as fast as possible while making sure I cover everything I want to cover. Hope you enjoyed this one. If you want more, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for the warm reception on the first updated video, and I can't wait until we get into our next video talking about how to set up our playmat, walking through each of the phases, and then the next video will be on priority shifting between players and the stack, how that works. The stack is when multiple abilities are firing because you're casting summons and doing fun stuff. And then we'll kind of wrap it up with a keywords and mechanics video. And then, just like we did in the first series, my son and I will sit down over at the overhead camera that we use for Deck Tech videos, talking, and we'll do a live game, example game where we play very slowly and we talk about every single thing we're doing and talk about the phases and stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this. Can't wait to see you in the next one. If it's not this week, have a great weekend, and I'll see you early next week. Later.